Since Barb and Steve White explained their unique situation in a previous On Your Side report, their issue still remains unresolved.
I feel like I'm guilty until proven innocent.
For Barb and Steve White, that moment felt like a technical glitch, something temporary, something routine. After all, this was their bank, the institution they trusted to protect the savings they had spent decades building. Banks don't just take your money, at least that's what most people believe, until one day they do.
Turns out their 3 Chase bank accounts totaling more than $48,000 were frozen and closed by their own bank, Chase.
Before their story reached the news, the Whites discovered that all 3 of their Chase bank accounts had suddenly been frozen. Not partially restricted, not temporarily flagged, frozen. Inside those accounts sat their life savings, $48,155. Money meant for retirement, daily expenses, groceries, bills, and the quiet stability people spend an entire working life trying to earn. The bank didn't warn them beforehand. They didn't get a phone call explaining what was happening, nor did they receive a notice giving them time to prepare. One day, their money simply stopped being theirs, and when they contacted Chase looking for answers, they expected clarification. Instead, they received a sentence that explained nothing. The freeze, they were told, was related to recent activity. That was it. No description of what activity, no indication of fraud, no timeline for resolution, just a wall.
That is like beating your head against a brick wall. It literally is, because you go through person after person. I'm not sure I can help you with this. Let you talk to this person.
When something irrational happens, the human brain searches desperately for a logical explanation. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe the system flagged something incorrectly. Maybe someone typed the wrong number. The Whites made call after call, trying to understand what had triggered the shutdown. Each conversation ended the same way. They were just redirected over and over, caught in the web of bureaucracy. They weren't accused of wrongdoing. They weren't told they were victims of fraud. They weren't even informed of an investigation. They were simply locked out. And the longer it continued, the more terrifying the reality became. Their entire savings, every accessible dollar, was gone from reach.
Very frustrating. Very, very infuriating, actually, would be a good word.
Most people imagine financial crisis as dramatic events, market crashes, scams, or theft. But the Whites' crisis looked different. Nothing had been stolen. The money still existed. They just couldn't touch it. But bills didn't pause because their accounts were frozen. Grocery stores didn't offer sympathy discounts. Utilities didn't wait for banking disputes to resolve themselves. With their savings inaccessible, the couple faced an unthinkable situation. They had to borrow money simply to survive. Friends and family stepped in to help cover basic living expenses, while their own funds sat inside a bank account they could no longer use. Imagine seeing your balance on paper, knowing the money is yours, while simultaneously being unable to buy groceries. That contradiction is what turned inconvenience into crisis. Before we move on with the rest of the story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Doing that could help it reach a wider audience and likely prevent tragedies like this one. As weeks turned into months, frustration gave way to something heavier: confusion. According to the couple's legal filings, their attorney repeatedly contacted Chase's executive officers through emails and phone calls requesting clarification. Those attempts went unanswered. No explanation was provided to the Whites. No explanation was provided to their lawyer. And when reporters began asking questions, the bank still declined to share details. The official response remained the same: refusal to comment. For the couple, the experience felt less like customer service and more like bureaucracy without a door. There was no person to reason with. They didn't have a timeline. In fact, It seemed like they had no clear path forward. All they could do was wait. Retirement is supposed to represent stability, a period where uncertainty finally fades. Instead, the Whites found themselves calculating every expense, relying on borrowed money while their own savings remained trapped. The emotional toll began to match the financial one. Not knowing whether you've done something wrong creates its own psychological weight. People replay transactions in their heads, wondering if an ordinary action somehow triggered suspicion. Did we transfer money incorrectly? Did we pay the wrong person? Did we accidentally violate some rule we never knew existed?
Their lawyer writes that he has contacted Chase Bank's executive office by email and telephone on multiple occasions since, but received no explanation regarding why Chase Bank seized the Whites' money. He goes on to say Chase Bank has been enriched by seizing the Whites' money and that the Whites have been impoverished by Chase Bank's failure to allow them access to their own money. They're asking for the return of their $48,000, interest, and attorney's fees, and any other relief the court deems just and proper.
Eventually, waiting stopped being an option. After 3 months without access to their funds, the Whites filed a lawsuit against Chase Bank. The legal claim argued that the bank had effectively seized their money while refusing to justify the action. Their lawsuit described a stark imbalance. The bank retained control of the funds while the couple suffered financial hardship. The couple demanded the return of their money, roughly $48,000, along with interest, attorney fees, and any additional relief the court deemed appropriate. It was no longer just a banking issue. It had become a legal battle. When local reporters began investigating the case, the story quickly struck a nerve. Because this wasn't a cybercrime or a scam involving criminals overseas. This was a mainstream American bank freezing a retired couple's life savings without publicly explaining why. Even with the media involvement, progress remained slow. The situation, according to the report, appeared stuck, unresolved despite public scrutiny. The couple's only remaining leverage was the court system itself. In essence, they now needed a judge to force answers from their own bank. Modern banking operates on trust. Customers deposit money believing they retain access to it whenever needed. Banks, meanwhile, maintain broad authority to freeze accounts when suspicious activity appears. Those protections exist for legitimate reasons: fraud prevention, anti-money laundering laws, and federal compliance requirements. But cases like the Whites expose a difficult reality. When an account is frozen, customers often have very little power to challenge the decision quickly. The institution controls the information. The institution controls the timeline. And until action is taken, sometimes legally, customers can find themselves stuck in limbo. For retirees or individuals living on savings, that limbo can become dangerous fast. Most people assume their bank account functions like a personal vault. Deposit money, withdraw money, repeat. But legally, deposited funds are not stored separately under your name. They become liabilities held by the bank, governed by internal risk systems and regulatory obligations. If automated monitoring flags unusual activity, banks can restrict access while reviewing accounts. What customers rarely realize is how little transparency sometimes accompanies those reviews. Banks may avoid sharing details to prevent tipping off potential fraud investigators or violating compliance rules. The result is a paradox. Protection mechanisms designed to stop financial crime can leave innocent customers unable to defend themselves. For Barb and Steve White, the freeze wasn't an abstract regulatory process. It was grocery money, medication costs, and their daily survival. Retirement savings represent decades of discipline, skipped vacations, careful budgeting, long working years. Watching that safety net vanish overnight even temporarily, carries a psychological shock few people anticipate. And unlike fraud cases, where money disappears instantly, this situation stretched out over months. Each day reinforced the same unsettling truth. Their financial stability depended entirely on decisions happening behind closed doors.
Attorneys called ours and said, Chase wants to give you your money back.
Eventually, after sustained pressure and legal action, the situation moved toward resolution, with the bank returning the couple's money. But the larger question remained: how does something like this happen in the first place? And more importantly, what protection exists for ordinary customers when access to their own money disappears without explanation? The Whites' experience highlights a rare but deeply unsettling scenario, one where the danger isn't theft by criminals, but paralysis inside the financial system itself.
It would have been really appropriate and nice of them to say, hey, you guys, this is what we see. Can you explain? Can you give us a heads up? Can we work this out? Nothing. It was just, we're going to take your money.
In the end, the most unsettling part of their story isn't just that their accounts were frozen. It's how long they were left without answers. Because for 4 months, a retired couple lived with a reality many people never imagined. Their life savings still existed, but until someone decided otherwise, it might as well have been gone.